They thought I'd roll over and pay my sister's mortgage, because family. So they dragged me into court for $500,000. But when the judge asked one question, and I handed over a single envelope, let's just say my sister's dream house turned into a foreclosure nightmare. And the truth came out faster than their fake tears. I'm Valerie Linwood. I'm 31, child-free by choice, self-made, and very allergic to guilt trips. My story starts with a text message. Well, not one message, a cascade of them. From my mom, my dad, my sister Alyssa, even my Aunt Marlene, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. All of them echoing the same 5 words. Can you help your sister? It began innocently enough. A new house. A fresh start for Alyssa and her husband, Carter. They'd been married for 3 years, and in that time, Carter had started, and crashed, at least 6 business ventures. He sold NFTs. He had a landscaping company that never landscaped anything. For a hot minute, he imported artisanal socks from Bulgaria. Spoiler, he didn't make a dime. Alyssa, meanwhile, had quit her job at the boutique and was trying to become a lifestyle influencer, despite the fact that she barely posted, didn't know how to edit videos, and kept tagging brands with the wrong handles. She had 782 followers. Most of them were bots. Still, she swore it was going to blow up. I kept my opinions to myself. I always did. But when she posted a boomerang of them clinking champagne flutes in front of a brand new 4-bedroom house with the caption manifested. Built different. God's plan. I knew exactly who would be footing the bill when it inevitably went sideways. And I was right. 4 months later, I was in my apartment finishing a quarterly audit when I got the call. Hey, honey, Mom said, too brightly. Do you have a minute? I already knew. She didn't ask about my day. Didn't mention the promotion I'd gotten last week. Just dove right in. It's your sister. She and Carter are in a bit of a jam. They are behind on their mortgage, and well, they just need some help catching up. Just for a couple of months. You know, until Carter's latest thing gets going. Right. His coffee truck meets crypto NFT hybrid for dogs thing. I waited. We thought maybe you could step in? Just for now. You don't have a family to support or anything, and you're doing so well. There it was. The classic Linwood guilt sandwich. I cut in. So, you're asking me to cover their mortgage? Well, Mom said, defensive now, it's not like we're asking you to pay the whole thing. Just enough to keep them afloat. I did some quick mental math. Their house, in that part of the suburbs? Monthly mortgage was easily over $3,000. Adding utilities and whatever Carter owed on his truck? I was looking at $10,000 minimum to keep them afloat. I said nothing. Then Mom added, in her sweetest tone, family helps family, right? That line, it always shows up when the family's asking me to do something. Funny how it never applies when I need anything. I told her I'd think about it. Then I hung up and blocked the incoming group chat I knew was brewing. But it didn't stop there. The next day, Dad called. We've all made sacrifices for this family, Valerie. Your sister is struggling. Are you really going to let her lose her home? And then he added the worst part, you don't even have kids. What do you need your savings for? Like having no children means my money's just community property? When I told him no, he got cold fast. Said I was selfish and vindictive. Reminded me that he helped with my college tuition, as if I hadn't paid most of it back through loans. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. Then came the public shame campaign. First, it was Facebook. Alyssa posted a meme about chosen family being more important than blood, which was laughable because I was literally born her sister. Then Mom posted a vague status, some people only love you when you don't ask for help. SMH. Aunt Marlene jumped in the comments with, sending prayers. Some people forget where they came from. It would have been funny, if it wasn't so calculated. They were trying to stir sympathy. Trying to frame me as the cold-hearted one while Alyssa, who lived in a house she couldn't afford and bought $60 candles, was painted as a poor, struggling victim. I ignored it. Until I couldn't. Because 2 weeks later, I got served. They were suing me. For $500,000. At first, I thought it was a prank. But the documents were real. Filed in court. Stamped and signed. The basis of the lawsuit? That I had verbally agreed to cover Alyssa's mortgage. That by not doing so, I had breached a familial verbal contract with demonstrated reliance and emotional damages. They even claimed I'd misled them into thinking funds were coming, and that Alyssa's credit was now permanently damaged due to my intentional financial withholding. The audacity was Olympic level. But here's the thing no one in my family ever learned about me, not even my sister. I record everything. Not because I'm paranoid, because I'm strategic. I'd started doing it after the last favor turned into a manipulation train wreck. The co-signed business loan I refused to sign. The car I didn't agree to lend. Every time they tried to guilt me, I saved receipts, emails, voicemails, even call recordings where it was legal to do so. So when I walked into court 3 weeks later, I had a folder titled Linwood vs. Linwood, and a USB stick with timestamps. My family was seated across the courtroom. Alyssa in some kind of floral prairie dress like she was on her way to Coachella, Carter looking smug and underdressed in a blazer and sneakers. My parents sat stiffly beside them. I wasn't nervous. I was livid. And laser-focused. The judge was an older woman, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. When my sister's lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, this is a case of emotional betrayal and broken promises from one sibling to another," the judge cut her off. "Let's get to the agreement. Ms. Linwood, did you or did you not promise to pay your sister's mortgage?" I stood. Calm. Unshaken. "No, Your Honor. And I have evidence." I handed the bailiff the USB drive. And then, like a soundtrack to their humiliation, the audio played loud and clear through the courtroom speaker system. My mother's voice. "We just hoped you'd consider it, you know, since you're doing well." My voice. "I'm not going to pay someone else's mortgage. That's not my responsibility." No promise. No obligation. Just my firm, calm refusal, twice, clearly stated. The courtroom was dead silent. Then the judge leaned forward and looked straight at my parents. "Is there any other documentation? Any written agreement?" My father muttered something. Alyssa squirmed. The judge nodded and looked back at me. "Ms. Linwood, would you like to file for damages due to false claims and legal harassment?" I didn't even blink. "Yes, Your Honor. I would." And that's when Alyssa burst into tears, dramatic, heaving sobs, like she was the one being wronged. But no amount of crying could undo the damage. Because for the first time ever, the truth was on record. When the courtroom cleared that day, the look on my family's faces was something I'll never forget. Shock. Not because I'd won, but because I'd dared to fight back. That was the real betrayal to them. Not refusing the money. Not defending myself. But refusing to stay quiet, play nice, and take the hit for the greater good of the family. As I walked past them, none of them looked me in the eye. Not even Alyssa, who had been sobbing into a tissue like her audition for a soap opera had gone south. Outside the courthouse, my best friend Marcy was waiting with a smug grin and a bag of lemon donuts. "You were so calm," she said, handing me one. "If it were me, I'd have thrown the USB at their heads like a ninja star." I smiled, but my chest felt hollow. Because the truth was, even when you win, it doesn't feel like winning when it's your own blood sitting on the other side of the courtroom. That evening, my phone was flooded with calls. Texts from unknown numbers, "How could you do this to your family?" Emails with subject lines like "ungrateful daughter" and "Alyssa deserves better." Turns out, my family had sent out a mass email to extended relatives before the hearing, painting me as the villain. Apparently, I was refusing to help her only sister, despite being wealthy, childless, and living alone with no responsibilities. And now they were deeply ashamed that I would weaponize the legal system to humiliate them. The rage burned like acid. So I replied to exactly one of them, Aunt Janice, the one who sent me an essay about how families should stick together. I simply attached the audio file from the courtroom and hit send. 2 hours later, she replied with a single sentence. "Wow. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Valerie." Still, most stayed silent. Then came the kicker. 3 days after the hearing, I received a letter, not from my parents, not from Alyssa, but from Carter. A formal notice, stating that if I didn't agree to settle out of court, again, they would be appealing the case and publicizing the cruelty I had inflicted on their family. Yes, You read that right. Carter, whose last successful financial venture was selling expired protein powder at a flea market, was threatening me, the one with actual legal grounds, with a PR disaster. That's when I realized something. They weren't embarrassed. They were enraged. But not because they lost. Because I didn't play the role. The responsible one. The backup wallet. The quiet achiever who's supposed to rescue everyone else when their chaos catches up. They were mad because I stopped being useful. I called my lawyer. You want to pursue damages? He asked. Or just let this die quietly? I didn't even hesitate. Let's pursue. And that's when things really blew up. We filed for damages the next week, citing emotional distress, legal harassment, and defamation. The claim wasn't just about the $500,000 suit, it was about the coordinated public attack. The emails. The social media posts. The mass messaging campaign that had tried to turn everyone I loved against me. I submitted screenshots. DMs. Statements from co-workers who had seen the posts and asked if I was okay. And yes, the audio again. This time in a file folder labeled Exhibit, Family Firestorm. The moment the claim was made public record, it went viral in our small town. People talk. Neighbors whisper. And soon, everyone knew that Valerie Linwood wasn't just the family black sheep, she was the one who took her whole family to court, and won. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Alyssa's influencer dreams? They finally came true, just not the way she wanted. A TikToker who does court drama reenactments found the case and posted a dramatic reading of the transcript. She played both me and Alyssa, switching wigs mid-sentence, and the video racked up 3.7 million views in a week. Suddenly, Alyssa was trending, but not for her decor tips. She was being dubbed Mortgage Moocher and Crying Karen. Carter, meanwhile, tried to clap back online, claiming the video was fake news, but people found his sock business LLC online and turned it into a meme. And that's when the calls stopped. The silence was almost eerie. Until the final straw landed in my inbox. An email from my mom. Subject line, an apology. Sort of. She wrote. I see now that maybe we didn't handle things the best way. Your sister is going through a lot, and so are we. It wasn't fair to sue you, and I'm sorry if it caused you distress. But we were just desperate. Family should always come first, even if that family makes mistakes. Maybe someday, we can put this behind us. There was no mention of her posts. Or her lies. Or the fact that she let the entire extended family believe I was some cruel villain while she was the one orchestrating the entire plan behind the scenes. No. It was my responsibility to move on. So I did. Just, not the way she wanted. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. Not the petty kind, anyway. What I wanted now was clarity. Closure. And a permanent seat at my own table, not one they'd keep pulling out from under me whenever they felt entitled. So I replied to my mother's email. Just one line. When you're ready to apologize without blaming me for your choices, I'll listen. She never responded. Not right away, anyway. In the meantime, my lawsuit for damages was moving forward. And guess what? For all of Carter's posturing, they didn't have the stomach to fight it. 2 weeks after we filed, they requested mediation. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want another round of Alyssa's tears or Mom's dramatic sighing or Carter's smug condescension. But then I realized something. This was my chance to end it. Legally, emotionally, financially, on my terms. The mediation took place in a private room at a local law office. I showed up in a sharp navy suit, hair back, no makeup except lip gloss. I wanted to look exactly how I felt, unbothered, in control, and 0% interested in playing nice anymore. They were all there, Mom, Dad, Alyssa, and Carter. No apologies. Just stiff nods and darting eyes. The mediator, a calm woman in her 50s named Judith, asked us to start with opening statements. Carter leaned in first, ever the fake diplomat. We understand this has been hard for everyone, he began. We never wanted to hurt Valerie. But when one family member is in a position to help another and refuses, it creates. I'm going to stop you right there, Judith said, glancing at me. Valerie, do you want to respond? I smiled slightly. There's no misunderstanding here. They didn't just ask me to help. They sued me for $500,000. Then they let the entire extended family believe I was some selfish, heartless villain. Alyssa sniffled. I was losing the house, she whispered. I was pregnant and scared and didn't know what else to do. You were also spending money on spa days and matching nursery wallpaper, I shot back. You didn't ask for help. You demanded it. And when I said no, you tried to destroy my life. Judith cleared her throat gently. Let's focus on the resolution. That's when my lawyer handed her the offer I'd prepared the night before. And it wasn't just a legal settlement. It was a full circle moment. Here's what it said. 1. A full, written apology from each family member involved in the lawsuit, including acknowledgement of the defamation campaign. 2. A public retraction of the lies sent to our extended family, via the same group email thread they used to smear me. 3. A payment of $100,000 in damages to be donated, not to me, but to a fund supporting single mothers navigating financial abuse and coercion. 4. A legally binding agreement that no member of the family will attempt to contact me, solicit money, or involve me in legal or financial decisions for the next 10 years. Judith raised an eyebrow. This is precise. Intentional, I replied. Carter scoffed. So we pay 6 figures and get a gag order while you play hero. It's not a gag order. It's peace, I said. Something none of you ever gave me. Alyssa looked stunned. You're donating the money. Yes. Because I don't want a dime from people who would throw me under a bus. But I do want this to be a warning, for you, and for anyone else who thinks blood is a free pass to abuse. Mom stayed silent for a long time. Then she finally whispered, What happened to you, Valerie? You did, I said. You taught me that family means giving until you're empty. That love only counts if it costs you. That saying no is betrayal. So I learned the hard way what boundaries look like. They signed. Grudgingly, bitterly, but they signed. The money was transferred to the charity within a week. The apologies rolled in, generic, stiff, obviously drafted by Carter's lawyer, but they came. And the silence that followed? It was the loudest peace I've ever known. But I wasn't done. Because closure isn't just about walking away. It's about reclaiming the story, the one they tried to write over me. So I sat down and drafted my own account. Not for a courtroom. For the world. I wrote a blog post titled When Saying No is Treason, How My Family Tried to Sue Me into Submission. I changed the names, of course. But the story was all there. The entitlement. The coercion. The legal threats. The public smear campaign. And the final twist, turning the damages into a donation for women in similar traps. It went viral. Within days, I had hundreds of emails from people, mostly women, who had gone through the same thing. Guilt by family. Sued by exes. Tricked into signing away money or labor in the name of being a good daughter or doing the right thing. A podcast invited me to share the story. Then a second one. Then a TEDx event. People called me brave. But I wasn't brave. I was just done. Done being quiet. Done being used. Done trading peace of mind for approval I'd never fully own. And maybe that's what bravery is, in the end. Not charging into fire, but walking out of a burning house and refusing to go back inside, even when the people inside scream that it's your fault they're getting burned. Fast forward 6 months. I'm standing in a tiny bookstore in Portland. There's a stack of my newly published memoir on the table next to me. It's called Boundaries Aren't Betrayal, and tonight's reading is standing room only. In the back, I spot a woman holding a sleeping toddler, tears in her eyes. When I finish, she walks up and says, You gave me the courage to leave. My parents told me I had to work 2 jobs to support my sister's addiction recovery, or I wasn't a real daughter. But after I read your story, I said no. And I'm still standing. We hugged. We cried. And in that moment, everything made sense. Not the court. Not the settlement. Not the lawsuits or the gossip or the trauma. What mattered was this: I broke the cycle. And by doing so, I handed someone else the map to freedom. Not every story ends in reconciliation. Some end in revolution. Some end with a single woman, in a bookstore, holding a microphone instead of a grudge. And that is enough. 3 months after the settlement, I received a letter. Yes, an actual handwritten letter, on pale blue stationery, addressed in the loopy cursive I hadn't seen in years. It was from Alyssa. I stared at it on my kitchen counter for hours before I opened it. I was afraid of what I'd find. Accusations. More manipulation. A plea for sympathy wrapped in guilt and perfume. Instead, it began with two simple words. I'm sorry. The letter was 4 pages long. In it, Alyssa didn't beg for money, or even forgiveness. She explained. She told me about the night she found out she was pregnant, and Carter's reaction, which was far less noble than he'd portrayed. He'd wanted her to get rid of it. Said they couldn't afford a baby, that it was her problem because she'd forgotten the pill. She said she'd cried on Mom's couch that night, thinking her life was over. And that's when Mom first said it. Valerie can help. She has savings. She doesn't have kids. She owes you that much. That was the beginning, Alyssa wrote. The moment the idea of my money being hers took root, not as a desperate thought in her own mind, but as a given, planted by Mom. I let myself believe it, she wrote. That you were cold because you didn't show up with a check. That your distance meant you didn't care. That Carter was right when he said you were selfish, because it was easier than asking why he wasn't stepping up for me either. The last page broke me. I never imagined we'd end up in court. But once it started, I was scared. Carter said suing you was the only way to scare you straight. I knew it was wrong. But I stayed silent. That's the truth, Val. I stayed silent, for comfort, for money, for fear. And in doing so, I lost my sister. I don't expect your forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that it wasn't all your fault. Some of it was mine. Maybe more than I'm ready to admit. I didn't respond right away. I carried that letter around in my purse for a week. I read it on the subway, in coffee shops, sitting in my bathtub, staring at the waterline. Every time, I felt the same mix of grief and fury. And something else too, sadness. A sadness so deep it almost felt like nostalgia for a relationship I never really had. Alyssa and I had been close once. When we were kids, before Carter, before boyfriends, before Mom divided us into roles. The strong one and the fragile one, the smart one and the pretty one, the successful one and the struggling one. I remembered late nights building pillow forts, whispering secrets under blankets, covering for each other when we broke the ceramic bowl during Thanksgiving. That version of us felt like someone else's story now. But I missed her. I really did. So, when Alyssa sent another letter, this one just a short invitation to meet in the park near her new apartment, I said yes. I didn't tell anyone. Not my therapist, not my lawyer, not even my best friend Rachel. This was my choice. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The sun was low, casting golden light through the trees. I saw her sitting on a bench by the duck pond, hands folded in her lap. She looked thinner than I remembered. Older, somehow. When she saw me, she stood, but didn't smile. Thanks for coming, she said softly. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The ducks quacked in the background. Children ran past, chasing each other with melting ice cream cones. I didn't come here to defend myself, Alyssa said finally. I came to say the things I should have said years ago. I waited. I was jealous of you, she said. Not just the money or the job, though, yes, those things too. But mostly, your peace. Your independence. You left. You built a life that wasn't built around pleasing Mom. And I hated that you got out while I stayed. I swallowed hard. You could have left, too. I know. I didn't want to. Or maybe I did, but I was scared. Mom always made me feel like without her, I'd fall apart. Carter used the same tactic. At some point, I stopped trying to stand on my own. She paused. I let them turn me against you. I let them turn me into someone I'm ashamed of. I studied her face. She wasn't crying, but her voice cracked with every sentence. And despite myself, I saw the sister I used to know, the one who painted my nails before dances and snuck me extra brownies when Mom wasn't looking. What changed? I asked. She pulled a photo from her purse. It was her daughter, maybe 3 months old now, sleeping in a tiny pink beanie, her face soft and serene. I looked at her one night and thought, I don't want her growing up thinking love means obedience. Or that she has to buy her place in the family. I want her to see boundaries as strength, not betrayal. And I couldn't teach her that if I didn't make things right with you. I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was softening. I can't pretend nothing happened, Alyssa, I said. What you all did, what you allowed, nearly broke me. You let Carter drag me through the mud, lie to our family, smear me online. And you stayed silent. I know. You signed those papers. I did. We sat in silence again. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were, I said quietly. Too much has happened. I don't expect that, she replied. But maybe, someday, we could be something new. Something better. I looked at the photo of her baby again. Something twisted in my chest. I'm not your enemy, Val, she whispered. I never was. I just got lost. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. I could keep holding the grudge like armor. Or I could set it down, not for her, not even for the past, but for me. Because healing isn't about pretending pain didn't happen. It's about no longer letting it define you. I don't trust you, I said. I don't blame you, she replied. But I'm open, I continued, to seeing who you become. And maybe, letting you see me, too. Alyssa smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in years. That's more than I hoped for, she said. Thank you. We parted with a quiet nod. No hug. No dramatic reunion. Just a mutual understanding that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of something new, something built on honesty, respect, and earned trust, not obligation and silence. And for the first time in years, I walked away from our meeting not heavy with resentment, but light with possibility. Because sometimes, the biggest plot twist isn't revenge or justice. It's peace. 3 weeks after I met Alyssa in the park, something unexpected happened. I got an email. Subject line, your story helped me save my life. At first, I thought it was spam. But the sender's name, Ellie Stein, rang a bell. And as I read the message, my heart caught in my throat. Hi Valerie. You don't know me, but I read your blog post, the one about your family, the court case, everything. I found it through a friend who posted a quote from it on Instagram. I've never seen someone put into words the exact thing I was going through with my own sister. I cried reading it. Then I reread it. Then I finally did something I'd been terrified to do. I set a boundary. And even though it hurt, even though she screamed at me and told me I was abandoning her, I didn't crumble. Because your words reminded me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was just done being used. Thank you. I hope you keep writing. I stared at the screen, stunned. The blog post she mentioned? It was something I wrote in the foggy aftermath of the court case. One of those late-night, insomniac rambles I didn't even promote. It was raw, messy, and more journal than journalism. But apparently, it had found someone who needed it. And now, here was Ellie, a stranger, saying it changed her life. I didn't cry, not then. But I felt something crack open in me. A sense of purpose. Because for so long, I'd been stuck in that story. Trapped inside the courtroom scene, replaying every betrayal like a broken record. But now, someone else had read it and seen a roadmap. A way out. So maybe, it was time for me to stop reliving the past. And start rewriting the next chapter. A week later, I signed up for a storytelling workshop. Just a small thing at the local library, hosted by a woman named Carla who had the energy of a Broadway stage manager and the wardrobe of a thrift shop goddess. There were only 8 of us in the class. A mix of retirees, students, and people like me, folks with too many memories and not enough places to put them. The second session, Carla gave us an assignment. Write about the hardest decision you've ever made. I wrote about saying no to my family. About choosing my own life over theirs. About walking out of the courtroom that day, head high, bank account drained, but dignity intact. When I read it aloud, the room went quiet. Then Carla said something I'll never forget. You didn't just survive, Valerie. You transformed. That's the difference between a sad story and a powerful one. It hit me like a lightning bolt. Because she was right. I hadn't just endured betrayal. I'd evolved through it. And that meant I wasn't just a victim. I was a narrator now. That workshop led to more writing. More blog posts. More emails from people like Ellie. And slowly, I realized my pain wasn't unique, it was universal. Families everywhere were fractured by money, expectation, guilt, and unspoken resentments. And they needed stories like mine. So I kept writing. I wrote about toxic forgiveness, the kind you're pressured to give before you're ready. I wrote about financial abuse, and how it doesn't always look like theft. Sometimes, it looks like a smile and a signature. I wrote about golden children and scapegoats, emotional blackmail, and how generational trauma masquerades as tradition. And people responded. Hundreds. Then thousands. They shared their stories. Their betrayals. Their choices. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. One day, 6 months after the court ruling, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small jewelry box, and a note. She left this for you. I only just found it. Inside was Mom's silver locket. The one she used to wear every Christmas. The one I'd begged to borrow when I was 13. The one she said she'd pass down to the one who understands responsibility. I never saw it after that. But now it was mine. There were no pictures inside. Just a slip of folded paper. You were always the strong one. I'm sorry I made you prove it so often. I read it over and over, tears slipping down my cheeks. It wasn't redemption. It didn't erase the damage she'd done. But it was acknowledgement. And that mattered more than I expected. At the 1-year mark, I held a reading at a small bookstore downtown. The owner had read one of my pieces and offered the space. I wasn't sure anyone would show up. But by the time I stepped behind the mic, the room was full. Some familiar faces. Some strangers. All people who'd seen themselves in my story. I read the piece about boundaries. About Alyssa. About how sometimes the bravest thing you can say is no more. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud. It was sustained. And in that quiet roar, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not validation. Not revenge. Peace. Real, quiet, hard-earned peace. Alyssa and I talk now. Not every day. Not deeply. But enough. She sends photos of her daughter. I send her book recommendations. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. But we don't live there anymore either. We're building something new. And for the first time, I believe it might actually last. As for Carter, he's out of the picture. Alyssa filed for divorce 6 months after the court case. Apparently, his influence wore thin once the money dried up. I don't celebrate his absence. But I also don't mourn it. Some chapters end for a reason. So, if you've made it to the end of this story, here's what I want you to know. You're not cruel for saying no. You're not broken for walking away. You're not selfish for choosing peace. You're human. And if your family demands you break yourself to fit their idea of love, it's okay to step back. Sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is leave the courtroom, head high, and start writing your own ending. Because you deserve to be the main character in your life, not the cautionary tale in theirs. And that, my friend, is the real inheritance. It was a crisp Saturday morning when my phone buzzed with a message from a name I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years, Uncle Dennis. A text, of all things. Just 5 words. You've made the papers, hey? I blinked. Then I laughed. Because sure enough, the day before, a local news blog had published a feature titled Financial Abuse and the Hidden Cost of Family Obligation, quoting liberally from an essay I'd published the week prior. I hadn't expected it to blow up. But suddenly my inbox was flooded, my follow account was climbing, and I had 3 podcast interview requests in the same hour. It wasn't fame. But it was visibility. And apparently, that visibility had found its way to the extended Wilson family grapevine. I debated whether to respond to Dennis. The last time I'd heard from him, he was defending my parents' lawsuit like it was divine justice. Family helps family, he'd said, even if it hurts. But curiosity won. I replied. I told the truth. His response came quickly. You always were stubborn. I didn't reply again. But I couldn't stop smiling. Stubborn. That word used to be an insult hurled at me whenever I refused to go along with family dysfunction. Now it felt like a badge of honor. Because stubborn was how I'd survived. A week later, I got a call from a producer at NPR. No joke. National Public Radio. They wanted to do a segment on financial coercion inside families, and someone had passed them my blog. Would I be willing to come on the air? I hesitated. Radio was a whole new level. My blog felt safe, personal, tucked behind a screen. But live audio? That was exposure. Vulnerability. Still, something in me said yes. When the segment aired, I sat in my living room, clutching a cup of tea like a lifeline. My voice sounded weird to my own ears, too sharp, too certain. But as I listened to myself describe the lawsuit, the betrayal, and the healing, I realized something. I didn't sound like a victim anymore. I sounded like a woman who'd survived something that tried to break her, and turned the shards into art. Of course, visibility has its costs. Within hours of the segment airing, I received an email from my mother. Subject: "We heard your little radio show." My heart skipped. Not in fear, more like a muscle remembering old pain. The message was short. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just, "If you're going to continue spreading lies about our family, we will pursue further legal action. This is defamation." I stared at the screen, fingers frozen over the keyboard. Then I laughed. Because I'd been careful. Every name changed. Every quote documented. Every story told from my perspective, not a legal accusation, but a personal narrative. Still, I forwarded the email to my lawyer, just in case. His reply? "This is noise. Let them bark. You're protected." And for the first time in my life, I believed that was true. The fallout rippled, of course. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years crawled out of the woodwork. Some to chastise me. Some to apologize. But the most surprising message came from Aunt Renee. She was my father's older sister, a stern woman with a voice like gravel and a reputation for minding her own business. Growing up, she was the only adult who ever looked me in the eye and said, "Don't let them twist you. You're not crazy." Her email simply read, "Took guts. Proud of you." I cried reading that. Because Renee wasn't warm. She wasn't cuddly. But she was a lighthouse, blunt, consistent, and impossible to ignore when the fog rolled in. Her support meant more than 100 likes on a post ever could. I'd thought the court case was the end of something. And in many ways, it was. But what I hadn't anticipated was how it would also begin something entirely new. A few months after the NPR piece aired, a literary agent reached out. "Have you ever considered writing a book?" At first, I laughed. Me? A book? But she wasn't kidding. We had a Zoom call. She was sharp, professional, and direct. "Your voice is timely," she said. "And there's a huge gap in the market for stories about familial financial abuse told by the survivor, not the psychologist or lawyer." We talked for an hour. By the end of the week, I had a book proposal in the works. Meanwhile, Alyssa was thriving in her own way. She started attending therapy. Not just for herself, but eventually with her daughter, too. She moved into a small rental house, took a job as a pharmacy tech, and started building credit in her own name. We weren't best friends. But we were sisters again. One night, after too much wine and a marathon of bad reality TV, she looked at me and said, "I used to think you were selfish for walking away. But now I think, maybe you were the first brave one." I hugged her. Hard. Because that was the closest she'd ever come to saying sorry. And honestly, it was enough. The book took a year to write. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, reliving every moment, every manipulation, every gut-wrenching choice. But also the most healing. Because in the process of writing it, I reframed everything. I wasn't just a woman who'd been sued by her parents. I was someone who stood up for herself, and survived. The book was called The Price of Yes: How I Broke Free from Family Debt and Found Myself. It hit shelves 6 months later. And on the day of the launch party, I stood in a bookstore packed with readers, survivors, and allies, clutching a microphone. I read a passage from chapter 1. The courtroom scene. The moment I said no and meant it. The room was silent. Then someone in the back said, "Thank you." And that was it. That was everything. A year later, I teach workshops of my own. Storytelling as healing. Financial boundary setting. How to reclaim your voice when your family's tried to silence it. People fly in for these. They cry. They hug. They share. And I listen. Because I know what it feels like to need someone, anyone, to say, You're not wrong. You're not crazy. And you're not alone. What I do now. Not just write, but witness. That's. And in witnessing others, I finally healed myself. The courthouse on the third day of trial was quiet in a way that made my stomach knot. No media, no chatter, no excited family whispering in rows behind us. Just the cold shuffle of paperwork and the sharp click of heels on tile as everyone filed in for what was supposed to be a short continuation. We were expecting to finalize arguments and set dates for settlement. But the air in the courtroom felt different. Thicker. I sat at the table beside my attorney, Marla, who hadn't stopped reviewing notes since she arrived. She was tense, even for her. Something's shifted, she murmured without looking up. I turned slightly. Across from us, Alyssa sat stiffly, her back straight but eyes darting toward the door. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but she kept glancing to her left, like she was waiting for someone. Then the doors opened, and Carter walked in. And just like that, I understood. Carter was supposed to be out of town. At least, that's what Alyssa had claimed in the emails we subpoenaed. Unavailable to testify, she had said, citing travel for a business trip. But here he was. In a tailored suit, hair gelled, walking like he owned the courtroom. I leaned toward Marla. She lied about his availability. Clearly, Marla said, eyes narrowing. Carter approached Alyssa, whispered something into her ear, and she visibly flinched. Her posture collapsed in on itself. Her confidence, whatever she had left, was gone. Even her lawyer looked rattled. Judge Harrison entered and banged the gavel, starting the session. Before we begin, he said, peering over his glasses, the defense has submitted a request to recall a witness for direct examination. This is irregular at this stage, but I've granted it due to new evidence provided this morning. My heart skipped. Carter was sworn in. And for the first time in this whole debacle, the truth started bleeding out, not in trickles, but in a dam burst. He smiled smugly, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Maybe he thought he was clever. Maybe he thought he could spin it. But what he actually did was torch his entire case, and Alyssa's. I want to make it clear, he said confidently, that the idea for the loan agreement between Valerie and Alyssa came from me. It was, let's say, an arrangement that worked for all of us. My lawyer's pen stopped mid-stroke. The judge leaned forward. Explain, Harrison said, voice suddenly sharp. Carter nodded, like this was his moment to shine. Alyssa and I were in financial trouble, yes. But Valerie has always been the more stable one. She's never liked me, everyone knows that, but she adores her sister. So we decided, instead of begging her for money, we'd position it as an obligation. Something inherited. My mouth fell open. He continued, unbothered. We convinced Alyssa to say Mom had verbally promised that Valerie would help. And since Valerie was technically on some of the documents from years ago. That's a lie, I blurted. The judge raised a hand. Ms. Grayson, you'll have your time to respond. Let him continue. Marla scribbled furiously beside me. Carter leaned back. Anyway, it was never meant to go this far. But once Valerie said no, we figured a little pressure might help. The lawsuit was a last resort. It was supposed to scare her. You know, make her settle. But, clearly, it didn't work. He chuckled. No one else did. Alyssa, across the aisle, looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Her lawyer's mouth was pressed into a flat line. The judge, now fully alert, asked slowly, "Are you admitting under oath that the financial obligation being claimed here was fabricated, as a manipulation tactic?" Carter blinked. And for a moment, just a second, I saw something shift. His mouth twitched. He realized he'd said too much. But it was too late. I'm just saying, he tried to backtrack, that we leveraged an opportunity. Not fabricated. You know how families work, everything's fuzzy when it comes to promises. Judge Harrison didn't smile. What I know, he said coldly, is the difference between legal obligation and familial manipulation. You may step down. Carter returned to his seat. Alyssa didn't look at him. Didn't touch him. Her hands were trembling. Her face pale. And then, in what might have been the first genuine act of responsibility I'd seen from her in years, she whispered something to her lawyer, who immediately stood and requested a sidebar with the judge. It lasted 5 minutes. When they returned, Alyssa stood. Your Honor, her lawyer said, my client wishes to make a statement. Judge Harrison nodded. Proceed. Alyssa's voice was barely audible. Your Honor, I want to withdraw the lawsuit. My breath caught. My sister, she continued, does not owe me any money. There was pressure and lies, and I was part of it. But I can't do this anymore. Tears streamed down her face. I'm sorry. For the first time since our mother died, I didn't feel rage when I looked at Alyssa. Just sorrow. And maybe the faintest spark of hope? The judge nodded once. Lawsuit dismissed. With prejudice. That meant they couldn't file it again. And just like that, it was over. The weight lifted so quickly I felt lightheaded. I swayed in my seat, and Marla touched my arm gently. You won, she said softly. No, I whispered, I survived. There's a difference. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, not many, but enough to make the walk to the car uncomfortable. Someone must have leaked Carter's dramatic testimony. Marla shielded me from the worst of it. Alyssa and Carter left separately. She didn't speak to him. Didn't look at him. Just got into a taxi and disappeared. I don't know where she went. But I hoped, deeply, quietly, that it was somewhere without him. Somewhere she could start over. Maybe even be better. Back home, I made myself tea. Sat in the quiet. Let it sink in. I wasn't $500,000 in debt. I wasn't tied to someone else's mortgage. I wasn't being manipulated anymore. But I also wasn't triumphant. Because victories like these, they don't come clean. They leave ash. And broken pieces of relationships that will never look the same again. I thought about Mom. Would she have understood why I fought so hard? Would she have been proud? Or heartbroken? I didn't know. But I finally allowed myself to believe something I hadn't in a long time. That choosing peace over pleasing people wasn't selfish. It was survival. A few days later, a letter arrived by mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten. Inside was a photo. A Polaroid I hadn't seen in decades. Me and Alyssa, maybe age 9 and 6, baking cookies in the kitchen with Mom. Flour on our cheeks. Laughing. And on the back, a note in simple block letters. I miss her. I'm sorry. If I ever deserve it, call me. I sat with that photo for a long time. Did I want her back in my life? Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the door wasn't locked anymore. Just closed. For now. The email that changed everything arrived on a Thursday morning. It was from my lawyer, Ben. Subject line, urgent, new motion filed. My heart dropped. I thought we were done with courtrooms, filings, and emotional warfare. I'd already gone through the legal gauntlet once when my parents sued me for not paying off my sister Alyssa's mortgage. I'd won, barely, but at great emotional and financial cost. Still, I clicked. Valerie. It appears Carter has filed a motion to reopen the estate distribution. His claiming your mother's will was improperly executed. We need to talk. Carter. My sister's ex-husband. The one who'd encouraged her to drag me into court in the first place. Apparently, he wasn't finished. Even though he and Alyssa were no longer together, she'd finally filed for divorce months after the trial. He'd managed to dig himself back into our lives with this stunt. I called Ben immediately. His claiming what? I said, barely holding back the tremble in my voice. That the will wasn't witnessed properly. That your mother was under duress. Standard garbage, but he's hired a real estate litigator who's persistent. But Alyssa's dropped everything. She even apologized. So why? Because there's still money on the table, Ben said. And Carter's desperate. He thinks there's a backdoor into your inheritance. I closed my eyes. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. Again. I debated calling Alyssa. She wasn't involved this time. In fact, she'd been slowly working on rebuilding our relationship. But part of me still didn't fully trust that Carter hadn't looped her into this. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. When she picked up, her voice was quiet but warm. Hey, Val. I didn't waste time. Did you know Carter filed something against the estate? A beat. Then, what? You didn't know? No, she said, and I could hear the tension tighten her voice. I swear, Valerie, I haven't spoken to him since our last custody hearing. What's he trying to do now? I told her. And for the first time since our falling out, I heard something unexpected in her voice. Rage. Not at me. At him. He's using my daughter's inheritance to fund this crap, she hissed. Oh, he's lost his mind. We ended the call with a mutual agreement. She'd testify if necessary. She was done letting Carter fight proxy battles through her. In the following weeks, Ben and I gathered every document we could find. Emails, signatures, security footage from the bank where Mom had notarized the will. Every I dotted, every T crossed. The irony? My mother's estate wasn't massive. Most of it had already been settled. The money Carter was after was from the residuals of a property Mom co-owned with her sister, a building that had unexpectedly sold for a tidy profit. He wanted a slice. But what he really wanted was to punish me. To force me back into the fight. Only this time, I wasn't fighting alone. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom looked familiar. The same oak-paneled walls. The same rows of uncomfortable chairs. But I felt different. Alyssa was there. She sat beside me. And when Carter walked in, smug, suited, with his new girlfriend trailing behind like an underpaid intern, I felt something shift. He didn't intimidate me anymore. The judge glanced over the paperwork with the weariness of someone who'd seen it all. This seems like an awfully late motion, he said, frowning. And filed by someone who isn't even named in the will. Carter's lawyer tried to spin it. Undue influence, confusion, family dynamics. Ben stood and counted every claim with calm precision. Then he played the surveillance footage. My mother, lucid and determined, walking into the bank to notarize her will. This woman knew exactly what she was doing, Ben said. She chose to leave her estate to her eldest daughter, the only one who never asked her for a dime. The only one who didn't make her feel like an ATM. Carter tried to interrupt. The judge held up a hand. Let me guess, he said, eyebrows raised. You thought there was a loophole. Silence. The judge shook his head. Motion denied. And just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, Alyssa turned to me. I'm sorry again, she said. For everything. He made me believe I needed to pick a side. But I should have picked you. I nodded. I know. I forgave you a long time ago. Still, she said, fishing something from her pouch. This belongs to you. It was a key. To Mom's safe deposit box, she explained. I opened it last week. Thought you should have what's inside. Later that day, I went to the bank. The box held a few things, family photos, an old brooch, a letter addressed to me. Valerie. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye properly. I know our family has its messes. I know I didn't always defend you the way I should have. But please believe me when I say, I saw you. I saw everything you did to hold this family together when no one else could. You were never supposed to pay for Alyssa's choices. Or mine. You deserved better. I hope this letter helps you remember that I did love you. Even if I didn't always show it. Mom. I sat in the bank's little privacy room and cried. Not because of grief. Because I finally felt seen. 6 months later, I published my first memoir. It was called The Family Clause, a play on both legal clauses and the unspoken contracts we inherit from blood ties. It hit the bestseller list. I got invited to speak on panels, to consult on estate planning with empathy, and to host workshops for people navigating toxic family legacies. Carter disappeared from the public eye. Alyssa started a part-time job at a non-profit helping single mothers. We weren't best friends, but we were sisters again, in a new way. And me? I finally let go of the weight I'd carried since the day Mom died. Because sometimes the real inheritance isn't money. It's truth. And no one can take that from me again.